The office is as quiet as it gets. The old fan creaks overhead, and my coffee's gone cold. Just like the days I've been having lately. At 52, I'm a retired detective, now turned private investigator. My clients these days are mostly folks wanting me to track down missing pets or sniff out the guy who's been sneaking through their trash. Not the kind of cases that make headlines, but they keep me busy enough. And if I'm being honest, busy is what I need. The office is small, cluttered with files I've been meaning to sort out for weeks. My grandson, Sam, has been hanging around lately. He's a curious kid, fascinated by my old stories. It's one of the few connections I've managed to keep since my daughter and I stopped talking. Sam's presence has become a sort of bright spot in an otherwise pretty dim setup. Last Saturday, Sam was rooting around in my attic, looking for an old fishing rod, when he stumbled on a folder I hadn't seen in years. It was marked 1981 in red ink, a year that makes my skin prickle even now. He brought it down with that eager smile of his, like he'd just discovered gold. "Grandpa, what's this?" he asked, eyes wide. I stared at it for a long moment. "Just some old work stuff," I said, trying to brush it off, but he wouldn't let it go. "Can we look at it?" There was something about his voice, the curiosity that reminded me of myself back then, that made me nod. I wish I hadn't. Back in '81, I was a rookie cop, assigned mostly to the dull stuff, paperwork, traffic duty, things no one else wanted to do. One night, while reorganizing the archives, I came across an unclassified report. It was different. It wasn't like any of the other files, more like something that had slipped through the cracks. It described a missing child from 20 years before, with all sorts of weird details that made the hair on my arms stand up. Cryptic symbols carved into trees, shadowy figures seen around the house in the days leading up to the disappearance. The handwriting was shaky, unsteady, but the weirdest part was that it felt familiar, like I'd seen it before. "This is weird," Sam said, pointing at one of the notes. "Look at this writing, Grandpa. It looks a bit like yours." I snorted, but my chest felt tight. "Yeah, maybe," I said, shrugging it off. But I couldn't stop looking at it. It did look like mine. Too much like mine. And that made no sense at all. I remember showing that file to my sergeant back then, and he laughed it off. Called it a hoax, something to scare the rookies. I gave up on it eventually, but not because I wanted to. It just felt like nobody else wanted answers. The guys made fun of me for it, said I was chasing ghosts. Sam was persistent. He wanted to know everything, wanted to understand why the file had gone missing, and why it had ended up in my attic. I tried to downplay it, but he's like a dog with a bone when he's interested in something. He kept pushing, and I found myself getting frustrated. Not at him, really, but at everything I'd buried with that folder. The memories, the questions. "Just let it go, kid," I told him, my voice sharper than I intended. He blinked, and I saw the hurt flash across his face. "Why, Grandpa? What are you afraid of?" That question hit me harder than I expected. 1981 was also the year my little brother died. It was sudden, unexpected, and nobody could explain it. He'd been scared in the weeks before, said he was seeing things, figures in the dark, shapes outside his window. My parents thought it was just nightmares, but when I saw that report years later, it was like everything clicked. Not in a good way, in a way that made my stomach drop. I never told anyone, not even my wife back then. It was easier to just put it away, pretend it didn't mean anything. But here was Sam, staring at me, wanting answers, and I couldn't keep lying. So I agreed. We'd look into it. We'd find out what really happened, if only to put it all to rest. I don't know if it was the right call, but it felt like the only choice I had left. We started small. I pulled out the old file, the one Sam found. We went over every detail, noting down locations, names, dates. Sam was excited, treating it like an adventure, packing flashlights, maps, even a tape recorder he found in my closet. His enthusiasm was contagious. I'll give him that. For the first time in years, I felt that spark again, like maybe we could find the truth. First, we tracked down some of my old colleagues. Most of them had moved away or were long gone, but we found one. Bill, who used to work dispatch. He was in a nursing home now, his memory not what it used to be. When I mentioned the file, his eyes got this far-off look. "You shouldn't have brought that back," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Some things are better left buried." He wouldn't say more, just shook his head, his hands trembling. Sam was more intrigued than scared, but I could feel that old unease creeping back in. We kept digging. There was a historian in town, someone Clara, my ex, used to work with. He'd been researching local disappearances for years, said there were strange gaps in the records, whole periods where things just didn't add up. He showed us a photograph from the 1960s, a crime scene, with a police officer standing off to the side. My blood ran cold when I saw it. The officer, he looked just like me. Same face, same build, even the same damn uniform. Sam looked at me, eyes wide. "Grandpa, is that you?" I didn't know how to answer. We decided to visit the coordinates listed in the file, an overgrown patch of forest on the outskirts of town. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're not alone. We found the tree, the one mentioned in the report. There were symbols carved into the bark, faded, but still there. And beneath it, the ground was disturbed, like someone had buried something there. We dug, Sam working beside me, his hands shaking with excitement. We found it, a rusted badge, half buried in the dirt. It was from my old precinct, the number barely visible. But here's the thing, the number didn't match any officer I knew. It didn't match anyone at all. Sam was thrilled, but I felt like I was losing my grip. The memories were fuzzy, like trying to remember a dream. Had I been here before? Had I buried this? I didn't know anymore. Sam wanted to keep going, to find out more, but I was growing more afraid of what we'd uncover. I started to pull back, to question if we should even be doing this. "You're hiding something," Sam said one night, his voice sharp. "Why won't you tell me?" I didn't have an answer that would make sense, so I told him about my brother, about the shadows, the symbols, the fear that never quite left me. I told him about the guilt, how I'd always felt like I should have done more, seen more, understood what was happening before it was too late. Sam listened, his eyes wide and sad. He didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there, the tape recorder still running between us. A few days later, the historian called us. He'd found something, another photograph, this one from the 1960s, showing a group of people gathered at the edge of the forest. There, in the background, was a figure, an officer, and it was me. I could feel my hands trembling as I looked at it. The same face, the same uniform. It didn't make any sense. We went back to the forest. This time it felt different, like we were being watched. We found a box, sealed and buried beneath the roots of an old tree. Inside were photos, recordings, a detailed report of the missing child case, all written in my handwriting, and a recording, a voice that sounded like mine, warning of what was to come, of events that matched exactly what we were doing now. I felt the world tilt, like I was caught in a loop I couldn't break. Sam was shaken, but he didn't back down. "We have to stop this," he said, his voice steady. "We have to find a way to end it." I nodded, though I wasn't sure how. I'd spent so long running from it, from the truth. Maybe it was time to face it, whatever it was. Maybe it was time to protect Sam, to make sure he didn't end up like me. Haunted, lost in a past that didn't make sense. We returned the badge to the precinct, handed over everything we'd found. The historian started documenting it, turning it into a local legend. My old colleague, Bill, passed away not long after, leaving behind a few cryptic notes that hinted at more, at other cases like this, at other loops. But I was done. I'd had enough. These days, I've stopped taking cases. I spend my time with Sam, teaching him how to think, how to question, how to see the world for what it is. He wants to be a detective someday, says he wants to be like me. I tell him to be better, to be smarter, to stay away from files that shouldn't exist. The old file is locked away now, in a safe I never opened. but I left a note for Sam, just in case. If you must know, it says, be ready to finish what I couldn't. Story 2. I'm sitting in my cluttered home office, surrounded by the familiar comfort of old books, maps, and yellowed newspaper clippings. The dust tickles my nose as I leaf through pages, trying to prepare for an upcoming lecture at the local library on our town's forgotten history. I've always had a passion for the old mysteries, the stories that people let slip away over the years. Maybe it's because I'm a 60-year-old history teacher, the kind of person people turn to when they want to hear about the past. Or maybe it's because some things from my past never quite let go of me. There's this one case that keeps creeping back, from 1981. Back then, I was a summer intern at the local police department. My job was simple: filing paperwork, organizing the chaos that the officers left behind. It was boring work mostly, but then I found a report. It was different from the others, unsettling. It described a disturbance at the old orphanage, long abandoned by then. The kids there had heard voices, disappeared for days, only to come back without any memory of what had happened. The orphanage was supposed to have been closed since 1965, and the details in that report, they've haunted me ever since. I never could figure out why it was there or what had really happened. Clara, my closest friend, has never let me forget about that report. She's a retired journalist, and she's got that itch that journalists get, the one that doesn't let them leave questions unanswered. She's always been fascinated by that story, always pushed me to look into it. I guess that's why we work so well together. I'm cautious, and she's relentless. When I mentioned the orphanage while prepping for the lecture, she didn't waste a second. "You know we've got to dig deeper, right?" she said, her eyes lit up like she was 20 again. She started talking about rumors, experiments, secrets, and suddenly I felt that old pull again, a mix of excitement and dread. I remember my supervisor in 1981 brushing the whole thing off, calling it a clerical error. He laughed at me when I asked about it, said I was making a big deal out of nothing. But now, as I look at my old notes, I feel like there's something there. Something that was missed. Something important. Clara thinks so too, and she's pushing me, as usual. She wants us to go back to the archives, see what else we can find. I hesitate, though. The town's got this idyllic reputation, and I'm not sure I want to be the one to drag its skeletons into the light. The orphanage had always been a place people whispered about. It closed in '65, officially because of financial troubles. But I remember my grandmother, she used to be a nurse back then, saying strange things about it. She'd whisper warnings, tell me to stay away from that side of town, but she'd never explain why. I never pressed her on it, and then she was gone, taking her secrets with her. Maybe it's time I found out why she was so scared. With Clara's encouragement, and, I admit, my own curiosity nagging at me, I decide it's time. We'll look into it, see if we can find out what really happened at that orphanage. I gather my old notes, the photographs I'd taken back when I first found the report, a list of the names that were mentioned. Clara goes to the library, digging through the microfilm records, finding old articles about the orphanage. Most of what she finds is mundane, fundraisers, charity events, but there are a few articles that hint at something darker, strange disappearances, illnesses that swept through the place without explanation. We track down a former officer who worked there in the '80s, now living in a nursing home. He's frail, his memory not what it used to be, but when I bring up the orphanage, his eyes change. He looks at me like he knows something he shouldn't say. "You shouldn't go looking into that," he says. "That report was removed for a reason. People were protecting someone with power." Clara presses him, but he just shakes his head, muttering to himself. It's not much, but it's enough to keep us going. We find one of the surviving orphans, an old man now, living a few towns over. He's hesitant to talk, his hands shaking as he lights a cigarette. But once he starts, it all comes pouring out. The locked rooms, the strange chanting at night, the kids who would vanish and come back different, quiet, like they weren't really there anymore. He remembers a figure too, someone standing in the shadows, watching them, They wore a badge, he says, his voice barely a whisper. Like the police. They were supposed to protect us. We hit our first real wall at the archives. Key files are missing. Whole sections of the microfilm are scratched out. Unreadable. The librarian, a kind old woman who's worked there for decades, tells us she remembers the reel for 1965. Someone came in asking about it a few years ago, she says. After that, it was never the same. It feels like someone's been erasing the past, trying to keep it hidden. And the orphanage grounds, they're private property now, fenced off, guarded by an owner who isn't exactly friendly. He chased us off before we even got out of the car, shouting that we had no business there. Then Clara finds a photograph. It's old, faded, showing a group of children outside the orphanage. In the background, there's a figure in the window. Blurry, almost indistinguishable, but they're wearing something shiny on their chest. Clara zooms in and there it is. A badge. A police badge. But the orphanage was closed in 1965. No officers should have been there after that. The photo rattles me. I can't shake the feeling that I know that figure. I've seen them before, somewhere. Clara thinks it could be someone we knew, maybe even me. I laugh it off, but inside I feel a chill. What if it is me? What if I've been part of this all along and I just don't remember? Clara, of course, wants to keep digging. She's convinced we can find out who the figure is, cross-referencing police records, old yearbooks, anything we can get our hands on. We spend nights in my cluttered office, surrounded by papers and photographs, talking about what this all means. Clara tells me something she's never told anyone. Her mother was at that orphanage, just for a short time, before it closed. She'd been institutionalized, and Clara's always wondered why, what happened to her. It makes everything feel more urgent, like we're not just digging into the past, we're digging into our own lives, our own stories. My grandmother's warnings echo in my mind as we go deeper. I remember her face, the way she'd look at me when she told me to stay away from that place. I never understood it then, but now, I think maybe she knew something she was too afraid to say. I've been having dreams lately, dreams I used to have as a kid, dreams of the orphanage, of dark hallways and voices calling my name. I used to think they were just nightmares, but now I'm not so sure. The details match too well, like I've been there before, even though I know I haven't. Finally, Clara convinces me to go to the orphanage. We sneak in one night, slipping through a gap in the fence. The place is falling apart, the windows shattered, the roof caving in. We make our way through the ruins, and then we find it. A basement entrance, hidden beneath a pile of rubble, sealed with a rusted chain. Clara looks at me, her eyes wide, and I nod. We break the chain, the metal brittle from years of rust, and descend into the darkness. The basement is worse than I imagined. There are old toys scattered on the floor, faded files stacked in a corner, a journal lying open on a table. I pick it up, the pages crumbling in my hands. It describes experiments, things done to the children, things that make my stomach turn. The last entry is the worst. It talks about a returning force, something tied to the basement, something that can't be stopped, and the handwriting. It looks like mine. I drop the journal, my hands shaking. As we turn to leave, I hear it, a whisper, soft, calling my name. Clara hears it too. I see her eyes widen in fear. We look back, and there, in the shadows, is the figure from the photograph. The badge catches the light, glinting for just a moment before they fade away. We run, stumbling out of the basement, out of the orphanage, not stopping until we're back at the car, gasping for breath. Back home, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that somehow I'm connected to that place, to whatever happened there. Clara wants to write an expose, to tell the world what we found. She thinks it'll bring closure, that it'll free the town from whatever darkness is lingering there. But I'm not so sure. I'm afraid that digging too deep might make things worse, might bring something back that should have stayed buried. I canceled the lecture. I told the library I wasn't feeling well, and I haven't been out much since. Clara's still pushing, still fighting, but I'm tired. I don't know if I want to know the truth anymore. Some things are better left alone. But Clara's not one to give up, and maybe that's what scares me the most. Because if she keeps going, I know I'll follow her, no matter where it leads. I mailed the original report to Clara yesterday. I included a note. This is your story now. Be careful who reads it.